Did you know that for a Viking, a normal night's sleep could be more deadly than an enemy's sword or a storm? The Northern Night does not forgive mistakes, and any oversight in preparing for rest could mean that a warrior would simply not wake up in the morning. Temperatures dropped to critical levels, turning every moment of rest into a deadly game with the cold. In such conditions, sleep ceased to be rest and became a complex technological task of preserving heat. This required iron discipline, special knowledge, and unique equipment that few people think about today. The Vikings developed a whole system of survival in sleep, where every detail of clothing or body positioning was crucial. Their methods may seem wild to us, but they were what allowed them to survive where modern humans would perish in a matter of hours. Watch the video to the end to find out why Vikings never took off their shoes at night and what one detail of their sleeping bag saved their lives. What if I told you that sleep was the most dangerous part of the day for a Viking? In our minds, nighttime is a time of relaxation, comfort, and safety. But for a northern warrior, it was a time of maximum vulnerability. When a person falls asleep, their metabolism slows down and their body temperature naturally drops, which becomes a critical factor in freezing conditions. The body stops actively producing heat, and the cold begins to penetrate deep into the tissues, imperceptibly approaching vital organs. The most frightening thing about freezing is that a sleeping person does not feel pain or discomfort, but simply sinks into an even deeper and eternal sleep. The Vikings understood this insidious feature of the cold perfectly and treated the process of falling asleep with the same seriousness as preparing for battle. They knew that you couldn't just lie down and close your eyes when the icy wind was howling around you and the temperature was dropping below 30 degrees.
Overlap the layers tightly, ensuring no
Sleep
gaps
became a collective effort where each person was responsible not only for themselves, but also for the life of their comrade. This required strict control over one's own condition and the ability to feel the slightest changes in temperature. Relaxation and carelessness in this matter were punishable by death, which came quietly and unnoticed. Preparing for sleep took a considerable amount of time and included checking all equipment and clothing. The warriors examined their fur capes for holes or damp spots that could become bridges of cold. Any moisture that got on the body or clothing turned into an icy crust in a static position, drawing heat away at an alarming rate. Therefore, before going to sleep, they carefully shook off the snow and frost from the upper layers of their clothing so as not to bring them inside their sleeping quarters. This procedure was a mandatory ritual, the violation of which could cost the entire squad their lives. The very concept of comfort was completely absent on such expeditions, giving way exclusively to functionality and survival. No one sought softness or convenience. The main goal was to create an insulated cocoon that would preserve precious heat. Warriors learned to sleep in the most uncomfortable positions if these positions ensured the least loss of energy. Their bodies got used to hard surfaces, cramped conditions, and the constant feeling of the weight of layers of clothing. It was a harsh school of life that shaped a special type of people capable of sleeping literally on ice. Psychological readiness for such sleep was no less important than the availability of warm skins. Vikings cultivated the ability to wake up instantly and assess the situation, even while in deep sleep. They slept lightly, reacting to any sounds or changes in temperature around them. This skill allowed them to control the situation even in an unconscious state, which was vital in the wild. The fear of freezing became a subconscious guard that prevented the body from completely shutting down. Interestingly, Viking culture even had special omens and superstitions associated with sleeping in the cold. It was believed that one should not lie with one's head facing the wind, lest the evil spirits of the cold blow one's soul out through one's breath. These beliefs were, in essence, safety rules accumulated over generations and clothed in a mystical form. The elders taught the young how to choose the right place to spend the night, using natural shelters provided by the terrain. Every fold in the ground, every rock or tree was used for protection from the deadly wind.
See how the wolf favors its right paw.
Particular attention was paid to the state of satiety before bedtime, as a hungry person freezes much faster. The Vikings tried to eat something fatty and high in calories before going to bed to give their bodies fuel for warmth. The internal fire of metabolism was the only source of heat that could be relied upon away from the hearth. If there was no food, they chewed pieces of dried fish or meat to start the digestive process. This was the fuel that kept life going in a motionless body during the long hours of darkness. History knows many examples when entire detachments perished in their sleep because of neglecting these simple rules. Archaeologists find camps where people remained lying in sleeping positions, forever frozen in ice. These findings serve as a grim reminder of how fragile human life is in the face of northern nature. The Vikings survived not because they were insensitive to the cold, but because they respected its power. They turned survival into an art form, honed over centuries of battling the harsh climate. It would be very interesting to hear your opinion on such extreme survival methods. Do you think modern humans could survive even one night like this using the Vikings' techniques? Write about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new historical investigations. Are you ready to learn the truth about how the Vikings used each other as heaters? Loneliness on a winter expedition was equivalent to a death sentence, and the Vikings knew this very well. No fur, even the warmest, could keep a lone body warm throughout the polar night in extreme sub-zero temperatures. Therefore, the main source of heat was the group, which temporarily became a single living organism during sleep. Warriors slept in tight groups, literally huddling together to minimize heat loss. This technique of collective sleep was called a living stove and was strictly regulated by the rules of the expedition. The youngest or weakest warriors, who needed more warmth to recover their strength, were placed in the center of the group. The most experienced and hardened fighters lay on the edges, their bodies serving as a living shield against the outside cold. This rotation allowed the entire detachment to remain combat-ready and protected the most vulnerable members of the group. No one considered this a sign of weakness or a violation of personal space. It was purely pragmatic. Heat exchange in such a pile of bodies worked incredibly efficiently, creating its own microclimate within the group. The temperature in the center of such a ball could be tens of degrees higher than the surrounding air temperature. People warmed each other with their breath and body heat, creating a closed energy exchange circuit. This allowed them to survive even when the detachment was unable to build a fire due to a lack of firewood or the need for secrecy. Collective warmth was a resource that was always available as long as at least one comrade was alive. They lay down according to a specific pattern. Usually, the warriors lay down face down or side by side to maximize the area of contact. Back to back, shoulder to shoulder, every centimeter of contact was important for conserving energy. The entire group was covered with a common canopy made of sewn skins or canvas, which kept the warm air inside. Under this cover, an atmosphere resembling a greenhouse was created where it was possible to survive the most severe storm.
Just make sure the barrels are
However,
lashed tight.
this way of sleeping required a high level of trust and coordination within the group. It is impossible to sleep in such close quarters with someone you do not trust or with whom you are in conflict. Sleeping together strengthened social bonds and brotherhood, turning the ship's crew into a real family. People got used to feeling the shoulder of a comrade in the truest sense of the word. This created a psychological sense of security that was so important on dark and cold nights. Inside the living furnace, there was an unspoken code of conduct that everyone followed without exception. It was forbidden to move around unnecessarily so as not to let cold air under the shared blanket. If someone needed to get up, they did so as carefully as possible, and their place was immediately filled to preserve the heat. Upon returning, a person had to quickly blend back into the group, trying not to bring too much cold with them. These movements were practiced to the point of automatism and were performed almost in a half-sleep. Even chiefs and leaders rarely slept separately from their people on such expeditions, preferring the warmth of the group to the status of solitude. The division into ranks was erased in the face of the mortal danger posed by the frost. A chieftain sleeping among his warriors demonstrated unity of fate and a willingness to share all the hardships of the journey. This boosted morale and the leader's authority much better than any loud speeches. The only exceptions were when the chieftain was sick or wounded. Interestingly, this practice of collective sleeping also existed among other northern peoples, but the Vikings perfected it during their sea voyages. On the open deck of a drakkar, where there was nowhere to hide from the wind, such a huddle was the only way to survive. The sides of the ship provided only minimal protection, and only the warmth of comrades saved them from inevitable freezing. This way of spending the night also solved the problem of security, as it was much easier to wake up from alarm in a tight group. If one warrior sensed danger, his movement instantly woke the others lying close to him. This created a unified nervous system for the squad, responding to threats as a single organism. Collective sleep was not just a way to keep warm, but a strategic defensive formation. In this system, each person was a living heater for another, and the loss of even one fighter was physically felt by everyone. But body heat is only half the battle because it also had to be preserved. Have you ever wondered what kind of clothing allowed them to avoid freezing to death in such conditions? In the next chapter, we will reveal the secret of their unique sleeping bags. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of ancient technologies? The Vikings did not use the blankets we are familiar with. They created a prototype of the modern sleeping bag, which was called a hudfat. It was not just a product sewn from skins, but a complex engineering product designed for extreme loads. The hudfat was made from specially treated hides, often with the fur left intact on the inside, which created a powerful air layer. It was the air trapped between the fur fibers that served as the main insulator, preventing body heat from escaping. The leather for these bags underwent special treatment with fat to make it waterproof and prevent it from stiffening in the cold. The Vikings used the fat of marine animals, seals, or whales, which had unique water-repellent properties. This allowed them to sleep even on damp ground or on an open deck in the rain and spray. The outer layer of leather acted as a barrier to wind and moisture, while the inner fur layer worked like a thermos. This design was much more effective than any woolen fabric, which lost its properties when wet. Unlike modern sleeping bags, the hudfat had no zippers or buttons through which precious heat could escape. The bag was entered through a narrow neck, which was tightened with a leather cord around the shoulders or head. This minimized the area of contact between the interior and the cold outside air. A person would literally dive into this leather cocoon, leaving only their face outside to breathe. Often, these bags were made in pairs so that 2 warriors could fit inside at once, which increased the efficiency of heating. Sleeping together in one bag was even warmer than just sleeping next to each other, as there was no layer of air between the bodies. This required a certain amount of practice, but in the conditions of the North, personal comfort took a back seat. A double hudfat was a standard piece of equipment for long winter journeys. An interesting detail was that the fur inside the bag was often different. Thicker and coarser fur was used for the feet, and softer fur for the body. This was done to keep the limbs as warm as possible, as they freeze first due to poor blood circulation. The Vikings empirically came to understand the physiology of thermoregulation and took it into account when creating their equipment. Every detail of such a bag was thought out and tested in practice by many generations. Caring for the huft was a sacred duty of every warrior, as their life depended on its condition. The bags were regularly dried, cleaned, and lubricated with fat to prevent the leather from cracking and letting in moisture. A damaged bag could cause death, so repairing it was a priority at any camp. The attitude towards this item was as reverent as towards weapons or ships. In addition to bags, the Vikings used huge fur cloaks that could serve as an extra blanket or bedding. These cloaks were so thick and heavy that their weight alone created a feeling of security. Wrapped in such a cloak and climbing into a bag, a warrior created a multi-layered protection that was difficult for the cold to penetrate. The principle of multi-layering was the basis of the entire heat preservation system of the northern peoples. Archaeologists find the remains of such bags in burials, which suggests that they were valued in the afterlife as well. For a Viking, his sleeping bag was a home that he carried with him on his back. He spent a significant part of his life on expeditions in it, dreaming of home and glory. It was a cocoon that separated life from the icy death that reigned outside. Making a single high-quality hood could take weeks of work and require the skins of several animals. This made them very expensive items that were cherished and passed down from generation to generation. Losing your sleeping bag on a journey was a disaster, equivalent to losing your weapon.
Like this, so the wind cannot enter.
Incredibly, the principles laid down by the Vikings in the design of the hood are still used in polar equipment today. Natural fur and leather have given way to synthetics, but the idea of a closed air cocoon has remained unchanged. This proves that ancient craftsmen had a deep understanding of the nature of cold. Please like this video if you were surprised by the sophistication of Viking equipment. What if I told you that the ground was more dangerous than the air? When spending the night outdoors, the main threat was not the low air temperature, but the thermal conductivity of the surface on which people slept. The ground, stone, or frozen ship deck drew heat from the body dozens of times faster than the coldest wind. The Vikings knew that lying on the bare ground, even in a warm sleeping bag, meant never getting up again. Therefore, insulation from the surface was the most important task when setting up camp for the night. The first rule was to create an insulating layer between the body and the ground. To do this, they used all available materials: pine branches, dry grass, moss, or even shrub branches. The thicker this pillow was, the greater the chances of keeping the heat inside the sleeping area. Warriors spent hours gathering material for bedding, understanding that this was an investment in their own survival. It was the foundation of their night's rest, without which the fur walls were useless. On ships where it was not possible to collect pine branches, wooden shields were used, laying them on the deck under the sleeping places. Wood itself is a good heat insulator, and the air gap under the shield added protection. In addition, ropes, sails, and any wooden fittings were used to raise the beds above the icy planks. Sleeping directly on the planks, washed by icy water from below, was a sure way to get hypothermia in the kidneys and lungs. Personal belongings were also used: empty bags, spare clothes, saddles, and harnesses. All of this was placed under them. The main principle was simple: everything you have should be under you, not on you. One layer of fur is enough on top, but underneath, there must be a reliable barrier against the cold of the ground. Experienced warriors knew that cold penetrates from below like invisible water and floods the body's warmth. Sometimes, if conditions allowed, the Vikings dug holes in the snow or ground and covered them with skins. Strangely enough, snow is an excellent insulator due to the air it contains. The snow pit protected from the wind, and the skins insulated from direct contact with the snow. In such a shelter, the temperature could remain around 0 even in severe frost outside. To insulate the head, through which a significant amount of heat escapes, they used special pillows or laid their heads on a bag of belongings. Contact between the head and the cold ground could lead to meningitis or instant hypothermia of the brain. Therefore, the pillow was not an item of comfort, but an element of the thermoregulation system. They often used their own shields as headrests, covering them with a piece of fur. Particular attention was paid to the lower back and kidneys, which are most vulnerable to cold from below. In these areas, the layer of bedding was made double or triple, creating additional protection. Vikings suffering from kidney disease quickly became a burden on the squad, so prevention was a common concern. The health of a warrior was a resource for the entire ship. If they had to sleep on rocks, they tried to choose flat slabs that could be preheated with a small fire if it was safe to do so. The heated rock gave off heat for a long time, acting as a natural hot water bottle throughout part of the night. However, this method was risky, as the rock could crack or cool down too quickly. Underestimating the cold of the earth was a mistake made by novices, for which they paid with their health on their very first expedition. Old warriors always began setting up camp by preparing the ground, not by pitching tents. They knew that air could be warmed, but icy ground could not. This struggle for every centimeter of insulation was an endless battle with physics. The Vikings empirically understood the laws of thermal conductivity, not knowing the formulas, but feeling them on their own skin. Their experience teaches us that the basis of survival is a solid foundation underfoot. And how did they solve the problem of wet clothes, which could kill faster than frost? In the next chapter, you will learn why they slept with their shoes on. One of the most surprising features of Viking sleep during expeditions was that they almost never took off their shoes at night. This contradicts modern rules of hygiene and tourism, where it is customary to give your feet a rest. But in conditions of constant readiness for battle and severe cold, removing shoes could be a fatal mistake. Leather boots could freeze so badly overnight in the cold that it would be impossible to put them on in the morning without a long thawing process. Viking footwear was made of natural leather and required the warmth of the foot to remain soft and flexible. Left apart from the body, it turned into an icy block capable of rubbing the feet raw in the first few minutes of walking. And rubbed feet, for a foot soldier or sailor meant loss of mobility and, as a result, death. Therefore, warriors slept in their boots, keeping them warm and ready for immediate use. In addition, the feet are the first to get cold as they are furthest from the heart. An extra layer of thick leather and fur inside the shoes provided excellent protection against frostbite on the toes during sleep. Vikings often stuffed their shoes with dry grass or wool to create extra insulation, which they did not remove at night. It was a kind of removable insole that absorbed moisture and retained heat. Sleeping in shoes was also a matter of safety in case of a sudden enemy attack. Vikings did not have to waste precious seconds searching for and putting on boots in the dark and panic. They could jump up and engage in combat instantly, which gave them a decisive advantage in night attacks. Readiness for battle was more important than the comfort of swollen feet. Of course, wearing shoes all the time caused problems with blood circulation and hygiene, but that was the lesser of two evils. To minimize the harm, soldiers tried to loosen their laces at night, giving their feet a little freedom, but without taking off their boots completely. This allowed blood flow to be restored without losing precious heat and the shape of the shoes. If the shoes did get soaked through, they were dried on the body, as drying them by the fire was dangerous. The leather could dry out and crack. Body heat was the safest and most controllable source of drying, albeit extremely unpleasant. Sleeping in wet shoes was torture, but it guaranteed that you would have shoes in the morning. Sometimes special fur socks or stockings were worn over the main shoes for sleeping in particularly severe frosts. This created a thermos effect, completely isolating the foot from the outside environment. Such multi-layering on the feet made it possible to survive nights on bare ice. Foot care was carried out during short breaks during the day, when it was possible to quickly rub the feet with snow or fat. At night, the feet became an untouchable reserve of heat wrapped in leather. The Vikings treated their feet as a tool that needed to be protected but exploited to the limit. This custom of sleeping with shoes on gave rise to many myths about the savagery of the Vikings, but in reality it was a rational calculation. In a world where any delay could cost a life, a shod person was a living person. It was the price they paid for their mobility and survivability. Even in their sagas, they mentioned that a true warrior was ready for battle at any moment, even in his sleep. Footwear was a symbol of this eternal readiness and distrust of the treacherous northern nature.
Even tension, boy. A loose boot fails in the muck.
I have it now, sir.
Guess what happened next when they learned how to stay warm? They faced a new enemy, their own moisture. People release moisture through breathing and sweating while they sleep, and in the confines of a sealed sleeping bag, this became a deadly trap. Moisture condensed on the inside of skins and clothing, turning them into an icy shell by morning. Wet clothing loses its insulating properties almost instantly, and a person begins to freeze from inside their shelter. The Vikings developed a whole system of moisture control to avoid this wet compress effect. First, they never covered their heads completely, leaving a small opening to breathe outside. The vapor from their mouths had to escape into the frosty air, rather than settle as frost inside the sleeping bag. This required the habit of sleeping with a cold face, but it kept the body dry and warm. Before going to bed, they always dried their clothes by the fire, if possible, or froze them in the wind. Freezing allowed moisture to evaporate or turn into ice, which was then simply shaken off the fabric. Going to bed in wet underwear was strictly forbidden, as it guaranteed hypothermia. It was better to lie naked in a dry bag than in wet clothes. Special attention was paid to the ventilation of the sleeping area. From time to time, the bags had to be turned inside out and aired to remove accumulated condensation. If this was not done, the fur would start to rot and the leather would become moldy, destroying the protective properties of the equipment. Keeping the sleeping area dry was a daily routine that could not be avoided. They used woolen underwear, which has the unique property of keeping you warm even when wet. Wool wicks moisture away from the body to the outer layers of clothing, leaving the skin relatively dry. This property of wool was a lifesaver for sailors who were constantly exposed to high humidity. Linen and cotton would have been useless and even dangerous in such conditions. If their clothes did get wet and there was nowhere to dry them, the Vikings used the technique of drying on the body while active, but never while sleeping. Before going to sleep, they could replace the wet layer with a dry spare set, which they kept in airtight bags. Having a dry change was a sign of an experienced warrior who planned to survive. They also avoided overheating during sleep so as not to sweat. If it got too hot, the warrior had to uncover himself or remove a layer of clothing to prevent sweating. Sweat in the cold was a harbinger of freezing, so thermoregulation had to be perfect. This required close attention to one's own body. Moisture from the ground was also a problem, so bedding was changed or dried at the first opportunity. Pine branches that had absorbed moisture from the snow ceased to provide warmth and had to be replaced with fresh ones. It was a never-ending struggle for dryness in a world of water and ice. Even getting up in the morning involved a procedure to remove moisture. The frost that had accumulated on the collar or edge of the sleeping bag had to be carefully chipped away, preventing it from melting and wetting the clothes. Every morning began with an inspection for dryness. In this battle against moisture, the Vikings proved themselves to be masters of adaptation. They understood that water in any form is a conductor of cold and learned to insulate themselves from it. But what to do if the cold still prevailed? In the next chapter, you will learn how discipline saved those who began to freeze. The Vikings' sleep was never a continuous process for the entire group at the same time. They used a system of rotating sleep shifts, which not only ensured the safety of the camp, but also allowed for constant monitoring of the physical condition of all those who were sleeping. The sentries or watchmen kept a close eye not only on the horizon, but also on their comrades lying in a heap. Their main task was to notice the dangerous signs of hypothermia in sleeping people in time and take immediate action. In the conditions of the northern night, the price of a sentry's mistake was too high for every warrior. A person who begins to freeze in their sleep often stops shivering and becomes quiet, which is a sure sign of deep hypothermia. The sentries constantly walked between the rows of sleeping soldiers, checking on their condition, and sometimes even deliberately nudging those who were lying too still. It was a harsh but absolutely necessary control that prevented peaceful sleep from turning into a quiet death. If any of the fighters began to shake violently, they were immediately awakened and forced to move actively. In extreme cases, they were moved to a warmer place, to the very center of the living pile of bodies. Scandinavian warriors got used to this erratic rhythm of rest from an early age. The ability to fall asleep quickly and just as quickly become fully combat ready was considered an important skill for a professional fighter. Each guard change was carried out as quietly as possible so as not to disturb those whose turn to rest was not yet over. This order allowed the unit to function as a single organism, where each cell knew its time for work and rest. Mutual support on duty made the unit invulnerable to sudden threats. The sentries also kept a constant watch over the fire if it was possible to safely light one at the camp. The fire had to be kept going constantly, but at the same time very economically, as dry firewood was often in short supply. The ability to maintain a long burning fire that smoldered for hours and provided even heat was considered a special art among the Vikings. The responsibility for preserving the precious flame rested entirely with the current watch. A fire that went out on a cold night could mean death for the weakest members of the crew. The watch had to know the properties of different types of wood and be able to stack the logs correctly. A small flame required constant attention and protection from the wind or sudden snow. Sometimes the warriors had to cover the flames with their bodies or shields to prevent them from being extinguished by the elements. The warmth of the fire was the only thing that separated them from the icy silence of the wilderness. Preserving the hearth was a sacred duty, the violation of which was considered a serious crime. In addition, those on watch spent their free time drying the personal belongings of their resting comrades. While some warriors slept, others carefully held their wet mittens or hats over the weak flames of the fire. This was a special form of collective mutual assistance that incredibly strengthened the unity of the entire detachment. Waking up at the signal, the warrior received back his warm and dry things, which gave him new strength for the next day. Taking care of a neighbor's equipment ensured that tomorrow the entire detachment would be ready for battle. Such attention to detail helped prevent frostbite and illness during long campaigns. Dry clothes were more valuable than gold in the north because wet wool instantly sucked the life out of a person. The watchmen felt responsible for their sleeping friends, knowing that soon they would switch roles. This circle of mutual assistance made the Vikings invincible in the harshest climates. Everyone knew that their comfort would be taken care of while they gathered strength. Even on cramped ships, the watch kept a constant eye out to make sure that the sleeping sailors were not suddenly flooded by an icy wave. The watchman checked to make sure that the strong wind did not tear off the improvised shelter made of sailcloth or skins. The sea was always unpredictable, and every sailor's sleep was always reliably guarded by his faithful comrade. This created a deep sense of trust because you could sleep peacefully while your brother in arms was awake. On board a drakkar, this trust became the basis for survival on the open ocean. Proper rest allowed the Vikings to attack unexpectedly and with full energy. While their enemies were exhausted by haphazard night watches, the Northerners remained fresh thanks to proper rotation. They turned ordinary human sleep into a powerful weapon for their expansion. The ability to rest in the hell of the icy sea was their hidden advantage over other peoples. It was a strategy where every minute of rest was carefully planned and protected. Thus, the survival of the Northern sailors was a direct result of collective responsibility. Everyone understood that one man alone in the field is not a warrior, and one man alone in the bitter cold is a sure corpse. Only a system of constant mutual control and support allowed the Vikings to conquer the harshest lands on the planet. Their success was built on trust in those who stood guard over your short sleep. Without this system, they would never have been able to leave their mark on the history of great discoveries. Maintaining body temperature in extreme cold required a tremendous amount of energy. The Vikings intuitively understood the connection between food and warmth, turning food into a strategic heating resource. Their diet during winter expeditions was radically different from their summer diet. It was as rich in fats and proteins as possible. Fat was the main fuel which burned slowly in the body, releasing heat throughout the long night. Before going to bed, the Vikings tried to eat something particularly high in calories: a piece of bacon, fatty fish, or soup with added oil. This triggered the process of thermogenesis, the production of heat during the digestion of food. Going to bed on an empty stomach was considered a dangerous mistake, as the body quickly depleted its internal reserves and began to cool down. Food was an internal stove that needed to be loaded with coal before nightfall. They prepared special high-calorie foods for expeditions, such as dried meat soaked in fat or cheese. These foods did not freeze solid and could be eaten on the go or before bed. Compactness and nutritional value were the main criteria for choosing provisions. Each warrior carried a supply of such emergency fuel with him. Hot food, if it was possible to prepare it, was worth its weight in gold. Hot broth or herbal decoction quickly warmed the body from the inside, accelerating blood circulation. However, it was often necessary to settle for cold food, and then it had to be chewed thoroughly, warming it in the mouth. The ability to eat cold, frozen food was part of the science of hiking. Water also played an important role, as dehydration thickens the blood and impairs circulation, leading to rapid freezing of the extremities. The Vikings melted snow or ice, but never ate it in its solid form, as it took a lot of energy to melt it inside the body. Drinking water had to be at least slightly warm. Alcohol was strictly prohibited or used very sparingly on winter expeditions. The myth that alcohol warms you up was a dangerous misconception. It dilates the blood vessels, creating a false sense of warmth, but actually accelerates heat loss. The Vikings knew this and saved mead or beer for feasts in warm halls, not for nights in the snow. Food distribution was strictly regulated. The leader made sure that every warrior received his portion of fat before bedtime. The weak or those who were freezing could receive an extra ration to survive the night. It was a pragmatic approach to preserving the fighting force. Sometimes, when food was scarce, they used decoctions of pine needles or bark, rich in vitamins and resins. This did not provide many calories, but it supported the immune system and body tone. Vitamin C saved them from scurvy, and the hot liquid tricked the stomach. The metabolism of Northerners adapted to this diet. They could digest huge amounts of fatty food without harm to their health. Their bodies were tuned to efficiently extract energy from any piece of food. Food was the foundation of their thermoregulation. Without the right fuel, no amount of fur would have saved them from freezing to death. Food was their weapon against the cold, and they wielded it masterfully.
Are you warm enough by the fire?
Aye, this stew helps against the cold.
Physical training and equipment were important, but psychology played a decisive role. The Vikings had a special mentality that allowed them to endure hardship with fatalistic calm. They did not complain about the cold, as they considered it pointless and unworthy of a man. Complaining was seen as a weakness of spirit, and a weak spirit freezes first. Belief in fate, Virder, helped them accept circumstances as they were. If you were destined to freeze, then that was the will of the Norns. But a true warrior would meet his death with dignity, without whining. This inner calm reduced stress levels, which are known to deplete the body. Panic in the cold kills faster than the frost itself. They knew how to enter a kind of trance or meditation, slowing their breathing and calming their thoughts. This helped them conserve energy and endure long hours of darkness and immobility. The ability to endure was elevated to the rank of a virtue. Scandinavian sagas are full of examples of the stoicism of heroes in the face of natural elements. Collective spirit and humor were also powerful weapons. Crude jokes about the cold, their own situation, and each other helped to lighten the mood. Laughter got the blood flowing and prevented despondency. As long as the group was laughing, they were alive. Gloomy silence was a bad sign. Their upbringing from childhood prepared them for these trials. Children were not overly wrapped up, but were accustomed to the cold from an early age. Cold was a natural part of their world, not a hostile anomaly. They knew its habits, its character, and knew how to coexist with it. The Vikings also used visualization of warmth. In their thoughts, they returned to their home hearth, to the warmth of the honey hall. These memories warmed the soul, preventing it from freezing. The hope of returning and glorious spoils was a powerful inner fire. The fear of shame was stronger than the fear of death. Freezing to death because of one's own stupidity or weakness was shameful. Returning home and telling about the hardships endured was honorable. This social pressure forced them to hold on until the very end. The psychology of winners made them view the cold not as a killer, but as an opponent to be defeated. Each night they survived was a small victory that strengthened their self-belief. It was this iron character, tempered by the northern winds, that allowed them to make incredible journeys and discoveries. Their bodies were strong, but their spirit was unbreakable. Centuries of living in the north left their mark on the physiology of the Scandinavians. The Vikings had a number of biological adaptations that helped them survive in the cold better than southern peoples. Their bodies were more massive, with a thick layer of subcutaneous fat that acted as natural insulation. This was not obesity, but functional protection for the body. Their circulatory system worked differently. Northerners have more active blood circulation in their limbs at low temperatures, which prevents frostbite. Their blood vessels constrict to preserve the core body heat, then expand to warm the fingers. This vascular game was an innate survival mechanism. Their high metabolism allowed them to generate more internal heat. Their bodies worked like powerful stoves, burning calories at an incredible rate. This required a lot of food, but it allowed them to sleep on the snow. They were biologically designed for the cold. Light skin and eyes were also part of their adaptation to low light conditions, allowing them to produce vitamin D even in the sparse northern sun. This strengthened their bones and immunity, which was critical on long voyages. Health was their main asset. Body and facial hair also played a protective role. The Vikings' thick beards were not just a fashion statement. They protected the face from frostbite and wind. The beard created an air pocket around the chin and neck, acting as a natural scarf. They also had a higher pain threshold. What was unbearable cold for another person was just discomfort for a Viking. This insensitivity allowed them to function where others went into shock. Generations of natural selection left only the fittest alive. The weak simply did not survive childhood, so every adult Viking was a genetic winner. This was a population of people who had passed nature's most brutal filter. Their lungs were adapted to breathing icy air, reducing the risk of pneumonia. Their broad chests accommodated large lungs, providing the body with the oxygen necessary for thermogenesis. This biological foundation, multiplied by technology and discipline, made them the ideal warriors of the North. They did not fight nature, they were part of it, its harsh creation. We can only marvel at how evolution and culture created this unique human type, a type capable of sleeping in the ice and waking up ready to conquer the world. The history of the Vikings is not only a saga of battles and conquests, but also a chronicle of man's incredible struggle with nature. Their ability to sleep without fire or beds while staying warm and combat ready is an example of the highest level of survival skills. They turned their bodies, clothes, and companions into a single life support system that worked flawlessly in the most extreme conditions. Every element of this system, from a fur bag to a sip of fish oil, was paid for with the experience and lives of their ancestors. This reminds us that human capabilities are much broader than we are accustomed to thinking while sitting in our warm apartments. What other secrets of Viking life would you like to learn about? Perhaps you are interested in their medicine or methods of navigation on the open ocean. Suggest your topics in the comments, and we will be sure to cover them in future episodes. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this exciting journey into the past with us.